I never thought I would be standing on my own driveway in the pouring rain, watching my father lock the front door while he stared me down through the glass with a look of pure, cold satisfaction. He told me to stay outside until I learned respect, but what he didn't realize was that respect isn't something you beat into someone by making them freeze in a thunderstorm. He thought he was teaching me a lesson, but the only thing I learned in those 2 hours was exactly who my father really was, and more importantly, who was actually on my side when the world turned cold. Have you ever been pushed to your absolute limit by the people who were supposed to protect you, only to have a total curveball change your life forever? I need you to tell me if I was the one being disrespectful, or if my father finally got exactly what was coming to him when that black limo pulled up to the curb. To understand how I ended up shivering on a porch in my school clothes, you have to understand the dynamic of the Miller household. My dad, Richard, is a man who believes he is the king of his castle. He grew up with a very strict, old-school upbringing where children were meant to be seen and not heard, and he took that philosophy to a toxic extreme. My mom is a kind woman, but she spent 20 years being worn down by his personality, becoming more of a shadow than a person. I'm 17, a senior in high school, and for as long as I can remember, our house has been a minefield. If I breathed too loud while he was watching the news, I was grounded. If my grades were anything less than an A, I was lazy. But the real tension started when my dad's mother, my grandma Evelyn, decided she wanted to be part of my life. You see, my dad and his mother have been estranged for over a decade. He claims she was controlling and difficult, but from the letters she secretly sent me, she just sounded like a woman who refused to let him bully her the way he bullies us. The day it all boiled over started like any other Tuesday. I had stayed late at school for a project and came home exhausted. When I walked through the door, my dad was standing in the kitchen holding a stack of mail. One of the envelopes was thick, elegant, and addressed specifically to me. It was from Grandma Evelyn. My dad hadn't opened it yet, but he knew exactly who it was from. He looked at me with this vein bulging in his forehead and asked why his mother was still sending me garbage. I told him it wasn't garbage. It was a birthday card and an invitation to visit her for the summer after I graduated. That was the spark that hit the powder keg. He started screaming about how I was betraying him, how he had forbidden contact with that vulture, and how I was showing him a total lack of respect by keeping a secret correspondence with her. I tried to explain that I'm nearly an adult and I have a right to know my own grandmother, but he wasn't hearing it. He snatched the letter from my hand and ripped it into pieces right in front of my face. Something in me just snapped. I didn't yell. I just looked him in the eye and told him that he was a coward who was afraid of a 70-year-old woman because she was the only person who ever called him out on his nonsense. The silence that followed was terrifying. He didn't hit me, he never did that, but he did something that felt almost worse. He grabbed me by the shoulder, marched me to the front door, and shoved me out onto the porch. It had just started to drizzle. He told me that since I wanted to act like an ungrateful stranger in his house, I could stay outside like one. He said, "Stay outside until you learn some respect and realize who provides for you." Then he locked the deadbolt. I stood there, stunned. My mom tried to come to the door, but I could hear him yelling at her to get back into the kitchen. The drizzle turned into a downpour. I didn't have my jacket, my phone was at 5% battery, and my pride wouldn't let me knock on the door and apologize for something I didn't do wrong. I sat on the porch bench, soaked to the bone, watching the streetlights flicker on. I felt so small, so discarded. I remember thinking that this was it. This was the moment my relationship with my father died. I pulled out my phone with the last bit of battery I had left. I didn't call my friends, they couldn't help me against my dad. I called the number I had memorized from Grandma Evelyn's letters. She picked up on the second ring. I didn't even say hello, I just started crying. I told her I was outside, that Dad had locked me out in the rain, and that I didn't have anywhere to go. She didn't gasp or get hysterical. She just said, "Hold on, my darling. Stay right there. The cavalry is coming." My phone died 30 seconds later. I sat there for what felt like an eternity. The neighbors were peeking through their blinds, seeing the golden boy of the neighborhood shivering on his own doorstep while his father sat inside eating dinner. It was the most humiliating experience of my life. I was cold, I was hungry, and I was starting to lose hope that anything would change. So that is the situation I was in. I was 17 years old, locked out in a storm by a father who wanted to break my spirit, with nothing but a dead phone and a promise from a grandmother I'd never actually met in person. I had to decide right then if I was going to crawl back on my knees and beg for his forgiveness just to get warm, or if I was going to wait and see if Grandma was actually coming. Before I tell you what happened when that car finally turned the corner and the chaos that erupted in our front yard, I want you to pause and comment below. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have swallowed your pride to get inside, or would you have sat in the rain just to prove a point? Let me know, because I really felt like I was losing my mind out there. About 45 minutes after that call, a pair of headlights cut through the rain. It wasn't a police car, which is what I half expected. It was a massive, pitch-black stretch limousine. It looked completely out of place in our middle-class suburb. The car crawled down the street and pulled up right to the curb in front of our house. The driver, a guy in a full suit holding a massive umbrella, stepped out and walked straight toward me. My dad, hearing the car, had come to the window. I could see him through the glass, his face twisted in confusion. The driver reached the porch, bowed slightly, and said, "Mr. Miller, your grandmother sent me to collect you. Please, let's get you out of the rain." I didn't hesitate. I stood up, my wet shoes squeaking, and started walking toward the car. Suddenly, the front door swung open. My dad was standing there, looking frantic now. He shouted, "Where do you think you're going? Get back in this house right now." I didn't even look back. I just kept walking. But my dad wasn't finished. He ran out onto the lawn, getting soaked himself, and tried to grab my arm. That's when the back window of the limo rolled down. Grandma Evelyn was sitting there, looking like royalty in a faux fur coat and pearls. She looked at my dad and said in the calmest, most cutting voice I've ever heard, "Richard, if you touch that boy, I will have my lawyers dismantle your life before the sun comes up. You locked him out. You made your choice. Now he's making mine." My dad stopped dead in his tracks. He looked like a scolded child. He tried to stutter out an excuse about discipline, but Grandma just waved her hand like she was swatting a fly. She told me to get in, and for the first time in my life, I felt safe. The inside of the limo was warm, smelled like expensive leather, and had a heater that felt like heaven. Grandma Evelyn wrapped a blanket around me and handed me a hot thermos of cocoa. As we pulled away, I looked out the back window. My dad was standing in the middle of the street, drenched, watching his only son drive away in his mother's car. He looked so small. The aftermath was a whirlwind. I stayed at Grandma's estate, which was 3 hours away and more beautiful than anything I'd ever seen. She wasn't the vulture my dad described. She was a sharp, successful businesswoman who had worked hard for everything she had. She told me that the reason my dad hated her was because she refused to give him a massive inheritance early when he was younger and making bad financial decisions. He had been bitter about it for decades. My mom called me the next day, crying. She told me that my dad was a wreck, but that she was also proud of me for leaving. She actually ended up leaving him a month later, moved into a small apartment near Grandma, and started a new life. My dad tried to apologize a few times via email, mostly because he realized Grandma was the one paying for my college tuition now, and he wanted back into her will, but I haven't spoken to him since that night on the porch. He wanted to teach me respect, but he ended up teaching me how to walk away from someone who doesn't value my soul. I'm graduating in a few weeks, and Grandma is sitting in the front row. I learned that family isn't about who shares your blood. It's about who stands in the rain with an umbrella when everyone else is locking the door. Looking back, that night was the best thing that ever happened to me. It was the catalyst that broke my family apart, but it was a family that needed to be broken so we could all breathe again. My dad thought he was the one in control, but he forgot that the world is much bigger than his front porch. If there's any moral to this story, it's that you should never let someone use respect as a weapon to keep you small. Real respect is earned through love and protection, not through locks and rain. Like this video if you were on my side and think I did the right thing by getting into that limo. Subscribe for more stories like this where the underdog finally gets a win, and please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did my dad deserve to be left in the rain, or was I being a brat? I'll see you all in the next story.